Hey everybody, hope you're doing well today. Let's take a look at economic growth. And this introduction and overview video, which I plan to be really short, is just to give you the overview of why this matters and why we care. Okay, first of all, you should be watching this after you have a thorough understanding of the low unemployment and low and stable rate of inflation sections of the IB syllabus. And that's because this economic growth allows governments to monitor unemployment and low and stable rate of inflation. Because economic growth is going to say, okay, this is how much the output has increased from last year to this year, and that's going to be an indicator about employment, that's going to be an indicator about a low and stable rate of inflation. So if governments can manage the rate of growth, then they can also manage a really quick, or hopefully prevent a really quick rise in price levels or prevent a drop in price levels. They also will be able to prevent massive fluctuations in employment and be able to monitor the economy in such a way that it produces at an optimal rate but not too fast, okay? So we're gonna take a look at a few ways of expressing growth using diagrams. Basically, the long run aggregate supply and aggregate demand curve is one way, and the production possibilities curve is another. But first, let's make sure we have an overarching idea of exactly what economic growth is, okay? Obviously, it's one of the 5 macroeconomic goals of every government, right? What their goal is to try and manage the economy in such a way, right, that there can maintain low levels of unemployment and a low and stable rate of inflation. Okay, so what is it? Well, economic growth in the simplest of sense is defined as an increase in real GDP over time, okay? But the growth must be controlled, and that might seem odd to you, or maybe it did before you got into really the inflation unit. But if there's too much growth, there's going to be too rapid a rise in price levels as demand goes out. And as demand goes out, then at some point, those price levels will not be maintained, and they're going to drop back down. And what the government wants to do, it knows that that's happening, but slow the price level increase down enough so that the long-term quantity and quality of the factors of production can improve, and the overall production, the long-run aggregate supply curve, can sort of stay with it. And that way, the government will be able to manage the growth in such a way that price levels won't get too far ahead of wages. That's a kind of a nice way of thinking about it. Price levels get too far ahead of wages, people aren't going to be able to afford anything or as much, and that's going to end up being pretty difficult politically. So therefore, the government wouldn't be doing its job. So let's just take a look at one other sort of fact, and it kind of makes sense that emerging economies, and this graph shows us the economies of India, China, Germany, and the United States. They've experienced rapid growth while more developed countries have experienced more moderate rates of growth. And one really stupid way of remembering this is like if you think about economies as people, a young emerging person, it grows at a more rapid rate than an adult, right? Somebody who's already developed. And of course, as people move through their ages, right, you continue to get older and you continue to develop, but not in the most obvious of ways. And so the growth of a human being, as ridiculous as the analysis might, or the analogy might sound like, is actually a really good way of thinking about growth. An emerging economy is going to be like a young elementary school student and then a middle schooler, and middle schoolers tend to be a little bit erratic, and you can imagine the growth to be a little bit erratic. And high schoolers, you know, you're merging into yourself, you're changing, you're developing, and you get to a point, where all of a sudden things sort of level out. And that's when you become like an economy, if you take the analogy back to the economy. Okay, so I just like that kind of way of remembering it. And if you look at it, it's kind of true. Like the United States, this is starting in 1980, was a developed economy. And you can see rates of growth are underneath 5%. Right here in 1990, it got to 5, and then look what happened. Boom, it dipped back down. But usually the government of the United States and developed nations are able to maintain a low and stable rate of growth. Okay. And remember, so think about that. Of course, it's going up, right? I mean, this is just showing the annual growth rate over the years. But this is, say, 2%, that's 1%, that's 3%. So the United States is still growing. And Germany, which is green, you can see fluctuates a little bit more. It had some tough times in the early 80s, but then it just kind of settles out, and governments are happy when it's down below 5%, because then that means that wages are staying up with an increase in price levels. You take that as compared to China, which took off in the 1980s, having crazy, they've almost maintained in a bizarre way, almost a 10% average growth rate. That's really, really fast, and ultimately going to be politically difficult, I've always said, for China, because that kind of rate of growth can't be sustained. The crazy thing about China is they've really been able to maintain it. A lot of that has to do with authoritarian rule, and part of that has to do with the fact that there are just so many people in China that even though they've grown at such a rate, the impact on society as a whole, at least politically, hasn't really risen yet. And then the last one is blue here, and you see India, right, up above 5% most of the years from 1980 up until 2008. Okay, so economic growth, it's a key component of the government's ability to manage an economy, and it's pretty interesting. This is where you start to compare different countries and what it means to grow. And in the next two videos, we're going to take a look at how you would show this in a graph, and then we're also going to talk about and evaluate, because you have to, the impact or consequences, both to the positive and the negative, of economic growth. So I hope you thought this video was helpful. We'll talk to you in a bit.